In this session, we discuss the ways in which painting elephants led to discoveries about oppressive structures and stories of connection and disconnection. Welcome to the After Podcast. I am Naveed Zamani and I am your host. In this session, I'm excited to be speaking with Dr. Jayashree George. Dr. Jayashree George has backgrounds in art and art history with a BA and MA from India, and art therapy, MA, and her MS and family therapy from the United States. She has a doctorate in art therapy from New York University. Her research interests over the past 2 decades or so have centered in anti-oppressive clinical practices. Her current artistic and research scholarship explores the plight of elephants as they are blamed for their wildness and are oppressed in multiple ways. Using painting as research, she focuses on planetary health and its implications for human mental health. Jayashree, welcome to the program. It's so nice to have you.
Thank you so much.
This season, I'm asking interviewees for a story about a time that they feel they failed and what they learned. So, thanks again for being here, and I'll turn to you to hear about some of your stories and work.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much. I'm grateful to AFTA and you for this opportunity to be on the podcast. So failure is often a very interesting phenomenon because I think as much as unpleasant as it can be, it also has the potential to provide openings. Mm-hmm. So it's in that spirit. I want to read a bit of what I wrote in a paper that is currently under review. It's about my interest in environmental justice that I'm exploring through my paintings of elephants. In this paper, I wrote about exactly that moment. The way that my paintings started, the way this project of painting 108 elephants to advocate against the poaching of elephants, Africa as well as in Asia. It started years ago, around 2015, when I had this vision of painting 108 elephants, and the vision came complete with the title Chalk and Chains. And it happened at a moment of despair, because here I was in Kansas with a master's degree in family therapy, and I had a rather unlucrative private practice, but very rich in terms of clinical experience. And yet it was a moment of tremendous despair. I was incredibly lost professionally when I had this vision, and it was inexplicable. I couldn't find a way to explain it to myself why I had that vision, but I did, and I felt compelled to follow through. In my research, I found the work of Bednarek, who said that the language of ownership kind of dogs the mental health field. Like you have to own your feelings, own your thoughts, your ideas, as if those are bounded within a self that's bounded by one's skin. But instead, she said, serve something greater than yourself. I don't believe I'm serving the elephants, but it does connect me to something that is bigger than myself. And it was through painting that I found a unique purpose, because that is what I had been searching for. So in that moment of despair where I felt like I didn't know what I was doing, I believed in family therapy, I believe in art therapy, and yet I felt kind of purposeless. And with this vision, what it gave me over the last decade or so was it led me to researching and finding out these truths, not only about elephants, but about the planet. Like before this, I did not understand. If someone talked to me about climate change, I would have been like, yeah, but it would have still felt very abstract. If people talked to me about environmental justice, I would have been like, yes, of course, but it would have still felt abstract. But in painting elephants and understanding the intricacies of their lives and how similar it is to ours. In fact, if I were to make a t-shirt and have a meme on it, it would be elephants are us.
Hmm.
Because our lives are incredibly similar, and I would not have known that before I had painted. And even the ways they deal with trauma is very similar to the way we deal with trauma. The way they suffer in their communities is exactly the way we suffer in our communities.
Hmm. Yeah, can I ask
So,
about that, Jayshree?
yes.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
So, all I was going to
Yeah,
say is
please.
that it was interesting how, in a moment of despair, I found something that I could not figure out where that image came, except that I'd gone to Coorg many years before that and I'd seen the elephants and I'd photographed them, but I never thought much more than that.
Oh,
And suddenly, years later, it became the germ for some big project that took me forever to complete. And I've only now completed the 108
wow.
elephants. That's all I was going to say.
No, that's such a beautiful story, and I love the ways that you're kind of describing this project kind of emerging out of a moment of despair and kind of in a context where you're feeling professionally lost, if I heard you right.
Yes.
And I just want to kind of clarify some assumptions I'm holding just from what I know, you know, just the very little about elephants and how they kind of organize socially. I've heard they have like kind of funerals for the members of their herd that have passed away, and they have like very
They
kind of
mourn. They
rich,
mourn just like
complex,
us.
yeah,
Yes,
social interactions. It's beautiful. If I could ask a couple, like maybe just nitty-picky, curious questions
of
in
course.
this, and maybe you don't have the answer, but in this vision, like why 108?
Yes, that's often a question I'm asked. So in my vision, it actually was 100, but then a friend told me 108 is a sacred number for Hinduism, in Hinduism and Buddhism. So why not 108? And I thought, what's eight more? Of course, I'll paint 108.
Yeah,
Having finished the 108, am I going to stop? Of course not. It's going to be far more than that. I hope it is as generative. And maybe I will now also paint other animals and rocks and minerals and whatever else, you know. Also, another interesting fact that I was, in fact, looking up this morning is someone had also told me about how the Earth is 108 times the diameter of the sun away from the sun. So I actually went and did the math. I went to NASA and found out the diameter of the sun and the distance of the sun from the Earth. And I multiplied the diameter by 108. And it's approximately that much.
wow, fascinating. So you kind of find this number occurring
So
in
it's
nature and other contexts.
astronomically
Yeah.
interesting. But I know that there are 108 beads on the rosary that Hindus and Buddhists use.
Mm.
And you say prayers 108 times. So it's an interesting mystical number in at least a couple of these religions.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. If I could ask you another question about that, I guess I wonder like how you make sense of who you were and what you knew at maybe paintings number 0 to 10 versus 100 to 108.
Uh, a whole lot of things have I have found. So in the painting 1 to 10, early on, I wish I could show you some of those paintings. Maybe I'll look at the. I do have an inventory, and I can show you some of those paintings.
Yes, and we'll
So
describe them for our listeners.
in the first painting that I did, and all of them ended up being mostly 6 inches by 6 inches. So they are very small paintings. Um, I had painted this kind of walking elephant. It's a very decorative elephant. It's a commonly found motif in Indian art. And but I wanted to paint on it like it's one of those quintessential Indian images that you'd find on a pillow cover, embroidered or with mirror work. this walking elephant. It's got a fun stride, and it's clothed with a carpet on its back.
Uh-huh.
And but on that carpet, instead of just putting traditional motifs, I decided to put you know, a picture of a dead elephant, as
Hmm.
if to kind of contrast this happy walking elephant, but it contains in on its back a memory of other elephants that have just been slaughtered mindlessly or in the service of terrorism, or simply to get their tusk in order for some kind of profit.
Right.
So it's that juxtaposition that I played with in the early paintings that I kind of also became a theme in my paintings. This kind of contrast. So I have a couple of paintings I can show you if I can
This
share. If I can share
this
some.
kind of positioning, yes, of course, and we'll of course share and describe to the audience here. So as you're kind of pulling that up, Jayashree, too, it sounds like your interest in kind of drawing contrast and positioning the life of the happy elephant against the slaughter was present from the beginning.
It was present from the beginning, and then also this painting, which was about elephant in a cage. This was one of the earliest elephants I met in 2009 when I had gone to an elephant rehabilitation camp, and even that those words, elephant rehabilitation camp, is just such a uh, um, kind of demonstrates kind of the stupidity and the idiocy of something like that. Because these were wild elephants, but they were, someone told me from the elephant rehab camp that they were too wild because
Mm,
they had made an incursion into the farmers' fields for food,
mm,
not realizing that these were ancestral tracts that the elephants were used to using in their search for food and water. And so in the name of development, in many parts of Africa and Asia, the farmlands, in the name of development, humans have created these farmlands that are interrupting the elephant routes.
right,
And so there's bound to be a human elephant conflict. And elephants are often getting the short end of the stick.
yeah,
So by calling them too wild, but also there is a resonance there in that expression of too wild, because women have also been sometimes called too wild, as um, uh, uh, I'm trying to remember the author's name is Estes, the women who run with the wolves. She wrote that book.
hmm,
Um, who said that who also were seen where women like wolves were hounded, in her words, were hounded, harassed, and falsely imputed to be devouring and devious. When
mm,
in fact, she says, wild woman is the health of all women. So you can again see that correspondence between these
right,
elephant societies and the way humans oppress them, and the ways in which we also oppress each other in our human society. And I also want to say that even when I say humans, I think the vast majority of humans have been supremacists or been hegemons in our society or in the world. But it doesn't include those humans, especially indigenous Africans, Indians, indigenous peoples who have actually preserved the wisdom of having connection with all entities in our world.
right.
So, but they are a minority compared to the majority who have, I mean, we have fallen prey to this kind of corporate greed.
Wow. So I'm appreciating the way you're kind of characterizing and illustrating this, yeah, uh, kind of direct link you're drawing from the ways that we engage with elephants, put up, kind of block off their ancestral roots in the name of development and other motives, and then name them, the elephants, as wild and unruly and needing of rehabilitation. in the ways that we kind of impose those very same oppressive practices on each other.
Yes. I mean, doesn't that sound really familiar with the minoritized populations in our human society,
Mm-hmm.
where we say, well, they are savages, or
Right.
they are lazy, or they are in need of improvement?
Right.
And even like we say that, like Aimé Césaire in his work said that, in colonization, the colonizers saw the lands in Africa, Asia, and other places as untrammeled and in the hands of incompetent savages that they needed to then take over and improve, obviously for their own profit.
Right.
So you can see the resonance in each of the, it's very parallel.
Right. Yeah, it's quite distressing in so many ways. And Jayashree, I guess I wonder, like, because you're as you're drawing these parallels from the your observations of your engagement with relationship to elephants and their societies, particularly through your research, I'm curious if I can ask, like, how this kind of ended up shaping or affecting your clinical practice.
Yeah. I think that I think as a family therapist and as an art therapist, I'm trained to be aware of stereotyping. I'm trained to be aware of these power differentials among people, amongst between those areas in my own identity where I hold power and privilege, and those areas in my identity where I do not. And similarly with clients, the kinds of identities that they bring forward where they have they hold positions of power, and those where they do not. And I'm aware of that up and downness, that kind of buffeting nature of those differences within the therapy session, right? And within that therapeutic encounter. So for me, it's no different whether I'm a painter painting these things and understanding myself in the process, as I also try to understand the world. Similarly, in clinical work is also like artistic work, where I am attuning to what is different and what is similar, and then in trying to hold a position of curiosity about how this is then affecting their lives and what is it that I'm missing somehow as a
Mm.
therapist,
Mm.
because I can't know everything, but at the same time I'm both curious and watching and then trying to learn on the side and trying to bring that learning forward in my work. So uh, I think that's how the two are connected. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense to me. And one of the ways, and let me know, Jayashree, if I'm kind of like in line with how you're describing this and thinking about it, it's having me think about even how in therapy, like in the culture of therapy and amongst therapists, um, sometimes we can engage with families and identify um, people that or families that maybe are wild or unruly or kind of like identify their behaviors outside the particular boundaries of what we believe to be appropriate.
Yeah.
Um, And in that, like the way that you're describing this elephant ancestral roots and the ways that like farmlands get cropped up in them, it makes me wonder how therapy gets cropped up into people's lives, gets imposed. I do a lot of like work with mandated context too, families who are mandated to therapy,
Mhm.
and then they get shoved into therapy and then identified as unruly or wild or unable to or resistant to treatment or whatever language we set
Yes.
up.
Or difficult, somehow difficult.
Right.
Mhm.
And then in that too, creating language and context where we kind of squash moral questions. Like the term rehabilitating an elephant, like you said, it's like so ridiculous and silly when you sit back and think about it. But then the use of the word rehabilitation assumes there's a delivery of something positive that's better.
Yes. And
for
usually
the-
it is in the eyes of the dominant. It's rehabilitation on the terms of the dominant individuals.
Right.
In fact, your example of your clinical work reminds me of children who were referred to me and called feral.
Oh,
These
wow,
were
that's a pretty,
feral, like feral cats,
yeah,
that they were wild, and and that the system had somehow given up on them, and this was their last resort. In fact, there was another client who was also referred to me under the same, using the same language, that we have run out of options. We don't know what to do. So we will refer this client to you. See what you can do with them. So there's also already this sense of refusal and of seeing them as refuse, not as beings that are perhaps in need of refuge, which would be much better.
yeah, yeah. And trying to figure out what to do with them in the midst of what they're getting in the way of, rather
Yeah.
than how we can help
Yeah.
them.
And then in the case of the children, once I started helping them, and I would write up these reports to give to the team that was adjudicating the case, because I wanted things written down so that it would have a voice in the decision making process, because here are all these interdisciplinary people who are uh, mandated by law to get together and make decisions about children's lives
Mm.
and families' lives. And apparently, a social worker, I couldn't attend the meeting, and the social worker said to the client, the parent who they deemed as impossible, that they did not believe what I had written, and how could these children have actually done well?
Wow.
So there's already a presupposition that the children will not fare better on account of their being feral. So
Right.
when you have an automatic lens like that, it's very hard to shift that lens, except to keep doing what one is doing, and prevail on behalf of and alongside parents and families and children.
I'm so appreciating this kind of way that you're describing the work and the kind of metaphors and analogies you're developing. Jayashree, if I can ask you a question, and I worry that maybe if it's too personal, that you can feel comfortable just saying no or not answering it, of course,
Sure, of course.
in the context of this podcast. But you mentioned that this project kind of emerged in a moment of despair. What effects did it have on your relationship just to despair, to kind of be in this project? If that question makes any sense.
Um, I think, my despair was more on a kind of a larger scale, because if you ask me about my clinical practice, it was one of those places where actually I was feeling a sense of joy, actually,
Hmm.
because I felt that I could connect with the clients. Therapy was going as well as it could. I, I, was going to supervision. And I was actually in that, one of the most prominent places of joy for me was working with my Latina survivors of intimate partner violence, where the therapy was conducted in Spanish and English. I
Uh-huh.
was working with a translator who was
Beautiful.
also their advocate, and it was, but I was paid very little because the grant that paid me was pittance. But I would have
Yes.
never thought twice about it, because the clinical experience was so rich and
Hmm.
the connection with the clients was so rich that I felt like I was being paid amply, even though monetarily it was a total disaster. So it was that, again, it was that juxtaposition that, the work is fulfilling, but I wanted more direction. I was in a rural place where I did not have a whole lot of support. um, I wasn't really in private practice. I wasn't really, quote unquote, making money. And yet I could not really compare the richness coming through my clinical work and and its monetary comparison. It just
Right.
was disconnected.
Right. It kind of like reflects this tragic societal setup, at least that I experience in the United States, that the least paid positions are the ones that provide the most care generally.
Yeah.
And it makes me
I
think,
think
yeah,
also like teachers, teachers are not very well paid, and yet they are doing the most important work
right.
in society. And we're compared to like a Finnish teacher who is working a highly sought after job and is incredibly qualified, and the society has chosen that as something really valuable. So I think that idea of what is valuable is also coming into high relief with this work, not only in terms of my paintings with elephants, but in terms of what we do in our clinical work. That is clinical work valuable? Is mental health valuable to our society? um, is Are children valuable? And I think this upcoming conference that is about children and families, our
Hmm.
after conference, inquires precisely about that, I believe. Uh, to what extent are we valuing children and families? And many of us are working with children and families and couples. And how much is our society valuing these relationships, and how much is a relational valued in society? So those are questions I think that are worth asking, not just each other but as a society. These are questions worth examining.
And I'm just going to go out here on a limb and try my hand at this metaphor too, Jayashree. So, rein me in if I'm going too far with it. But as you're kind of asking this question, like what is valuable and how do we as a society kind of make those decisions or distinctions, and then the effects that it has on kind of where we put our attention or money, or makes me think of the elephants, and that a lot of them are slaughtered because what's valued is their tusk.
Exactly.
And I don't know, it's so wild to me to just think about the, I don't know, a beautiful animal, such a large animal, but too, like an elephant being destroyed for such an interesting part of it, I suppose. I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah, in fact, I examined exactly what you're asking. It's just so prescient of you to gravitate towards that idea of what is valuable for the elephants, about the elephants, is their tusk. And I call it, using Narayan's term, a synecdochic representation. That is, you take a part and make it represent the whole.
Mm,
So I want to share this particular slide with you that I created. Uh, just going to put it in slide one. So if you look at, earlier we were talking about these power differentials, right? The ways in which uh, those parts of our identity where we have power, more power, or less or no power, and then those parts of our clients' identities where they have more power or occupy positions of less power. And that when we look at um, the structures that organize such a power differential, such as patriarchy, the caste system, ageism, ableism, uh, heterosexism, so on and so forth,
right,
right? So when we look at these hegemonic structures kind of dismember connection because they hold people apart,
right,
right? So when I take the plight of the elephants and I chart what happens, so the tusk goes to the poacher because the poacher has taken the tusk
right,
and then sells it to the smuggler who sells it to the distributor, and it is then goes to the ivory factory in whichever country, and it is now in the hands of the carver who is doing something quote unquote cultural, and
mm,
it is for the purpose of some individual status that fulfills something related to their greed, and it is undergirded by ignorance, and then you're back to the task. because
Mm.
it's the ignorance that leads to the tusk becoming synecdochic.
Yes.
You don't see the animal for what it is, but you only see the tusk. And so that becomes a cyclical process. So this is the cyclical process of oppression. But now let's take the elephant and look at its life cycle in its own habitat. What do we see? We see the elephant in the forest or the desert, because it could be a forest elephant or a desert elephant. And what do elephants do? They eat fast growing trees. So they also cut trails through the forest because they necessarily do that. And then by eating those fast growing trees, their dung holds the seeds for dispersal.
Um,
And they cut large tracts through the forest by breaking and eating these trees. And those broken trees then become shelter for small animals. So nothing ever goes to waste. And then by cutting these tracts through forests, they are maintaining their elephant memories of trails through which they can find food and water. So these elephant memories are stored generation after generation. And so they become ancestral memories for finding water. And when there is a famine or there is a drought, they can dig for water during that time. And they have learned how to do that. And this then constitutes a generational transmission of knowledge that then keeps the memories alive generation after generation. So it goes back to the elephant, and the cycle continues, because now you have a baby elephant that continues that practice.
That's a really beautiful and amazing kind of path that you've carved out for us there, Jayashree. It's I don't know. I'm kind of it's in the context of the podcast too. It's kind of funny because I'm speechless because it's just such a useful and interesting metaphor and such a I've never kind of thought about uh, kind of the process of oppression and the cyclical process of oppression the way you described it, particularly in this way. I wonder if I can. Is it okay if I ask you a different question here?
Can I say one more thing before
Of
we move
course.
on? When we look at the second part, where the elephant is within its habitat doing its elephant thing, isn't it exactly like our theories, like when you take contextual family therapy or when you take Bowen family therapy? It is exactly that intergenerational transmission of
Hmm.
knowledge, transgenerational effect that we're looking for in our clinical work. No matter what theoretical orientation you use, I think most family therapists would agree that our stories are not in isolation, that there are ancestral stories to be shared, and that we are inherently storytellers, and the power of the narrative is that you don't have to stay stuck in a story. You could kind of paint your way out of a story to create a new story, because our imagination is boundless,
Yeah.
right? So I feel like what I'm doing in the paintings is no different than what I do in my clinical work. To kind of go back to a previous question you asked, but yeah, please ask me your question.
No, it's so lovely. Yeah, I mean, as you're describing that, Jayshree, I'm just thinking about the work I do with some families who, like some of the Middle Eastern refugee families I work with, who've come from like horrific experiences of war, and displacement, especially often at the hands of, I'm gonna use kind of like the metaphor I'm using here about oil and resources and the wealth that comes from creating weapons and yeah, the the money that comes out of war, um, and the incredible effects it has generationally on
Yeah,
families.
yeah,
Like my
yeah.
gosh, I don't know. It just yeah,
I think that's where I think it's really important for us to remember history, that we collect information not only about those families' histories, but understanding the history of their land, and the kinds of justices and injustices that were done in the name of whatever
right,
in that land, and how that then has generational effects. Just like, in this country, the the original traumas of chattel slavery and Native American genocide
Mm.
continues to have reverberating effects currently. And it's our inability to talk about it that has kept the trauma in place,
Right.
that generational trauma. So, similarly, in the Middle East, there is a long history of conflict, but there is also a rich history of culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think really understanding those histories are really important as we remember along with families what happened. And oil then becomes that synecdochic representation, that it stands in for something much larger, but it's reduced to something small.
Kind of becomes a tusk in some ways.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think. I think that's my hypothesis.
No, I love it, Jayashree. I mean, gosh, you have me like thinking about so many things. I mean, I was thinking about this interesting little piece I heard an interview with this person who went around the world kind of tracking the different ways that shepherds speak with their sheep across the world and just interspecies language and how there's each kind of cultural context has a unique specific language that the shepherd would use with the sheep and this particular relationship that was created.
Yeah,
Um, and just appreciating how your work here just feels like it's so honoring of life. And Jayshree, I guess as we're kind of wrapping up here, I wonder if I can ask you one more question, if that's okay with you.
sure.
I want to appreciate, I guess as a distant observer, please correct me if I'm misrepresenting anything, that it seems like the imagery and kind of the ideas of the elephant are kind of prominent in Indian cultures in some ways. I think you were referring to that.
Yes. In fact, there are a couple of paintings I want to show you that's about, you know, the elephant-headed god Ganesha is a
Hmm.
very common, is a very beloved and revered god for the Hindus. You know, he's kind of a jolly god who
Hmm.
is kind of the person who removes obstacles. So you want to pray to God Ganesha to remove your obstacles. And yet, the elephants are chained in temples. The elephants are made to stand in the hot sun in
Right.
Kerala, hundreds, at least 100 of them for a particular festival for hours on end. Not thinking that, first of all, these elephants should not be standing, number one.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the skeleton of an elephant, they walk on their tippy toes. Their toes are like this. So
Yeah.
they have to be walking at all times. That's why in the wild you see elephants walking large tracts.
Interesting.
They don't stand still. Yet in the temples, they are standing still. So it is interesting to me why, not understanding elephant life, you would then capture an elephant and make it stand and, provide blessings for temple goers and make them stand in the sun to do an activity that they are not designed to do.
Right. Well, and I guess I wonder, Jayshree, like as you're kind of describing all the ways that there's even contradictions within the cultural and religious context in the relationship to elephants. For, I guess like, if I could wonder, and forgive me for doing this, but for like folks in the United States who have a different relationship with elephants, um, what are your hopes that of how people might interpret or take your work here and apply it in the US?
I don't know that one has to be from any particular country to
Hmm.
appreciate, because what I'm offering is a kind of a logical way of thinking.
Yeah,
It you can change the instead of the elephant, you can place a human, and then have the same kind of stance of curiosity about who is this person, where did they come from, and how is it that they came to be who they are in this context. What are the contexts am I somehow missing?
One of their ancestral tracks.
What exactly? And larger cultural view. I mean, that's what we have. I mean, all of us start with the relation, ecological theory 101 with Bronfenbrenner's, ecosystemic theory, right? The ecological
Yeah.
theory. So that's our those are our roots. We just have to start there and remember that there is a chronosphere,
Yeah.
there's a chronological element to it. So, and we can have the same kind of idea about any other entity. So it's not just humans, but it's also the land, the rocks, the minerals, the
Right.
water. I would say let's start thinking about water
Yeah.
because we think it is such an abundant resource. Today it may be, but it is already under threat. And that for human civilization to exist, we need to be concerned about the things that connect us rather than the things that divide us.
Right.
I think that's ultimately my aim. So, no matter who we are on this planet, I think we need planetary consciousness and to start to figure out ways in which to use our imagination to connect with each other rather than to stay disconnected because it is to our collective detriment.
Jayashree, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing some of your work. It's so lovely to hear about just the logics you're creating. They're so useful. At least they have been to me in my reflections today. If folks want to kind of connect with you or your art, is there a way that they might be able to do so?
Unfortunately, I don't yet have a website, but they can email me at jayashree.george@gmail.com.
Perfect. Great. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much. You've been a wonderful interviewer, and I'm so grateful to you and after.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks, Jayashree.